welcome, bienvenue, Efchilasi. Je vais d'abord parler en français. Pour ceux qui me
We'll speak in French. For those that don't know, my name is Tim LeBlanc Murphy. I am Executive Director at the New Brunswick Environmental Network. I'm the one that's going to play the role Master Ceremonies for the day.
I'm the ED here at the New Brunswick Environmental Network. I'm going to have the role of Master Ceremony for today. I'm going to start too by recognizing the team here at the NBEN. So with us today, we have Annika Chasson, Zahira Danat, Somi Burkhardt, Clara Tyson, Vincent Lamberson, Sadia Ara, Doris Pinet, and I don't think he's here, but our bookkeeper, Ben Surratt, is part of the team. And my steering committee as well, on the NBEN steering committee. So Charlotte Flores will be chairing the business meeting later today, Lucille Doiron, Melanie Langille, Adam Cheeseman, Quinn McCaskill, Amélie Tremblay, Rachel Robichaud, and Angélique Dallien. So before we begin, just some technical stuff. If you need translation over the course of the afternoon, please find the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen and choose English if you wish to hear the proceedings in that language, and choose French if you'd like to listen in that language. If you don't require translation, you can stay here with us in the main channel. And thank you to James Couture, Jim, as always, for providing excellent translation. Last technical thing before we really get going, I just want to note that the panel for today and the workshops, we will be recording. The AGA, we will not. If you do not want to appear in a recording, you always have the option of keeping your camera off. So that's an option for you. All right, so we can go to the next slide. So here. Today and this week, more than ever, I really want to start by emphatically recognizing that most of us on the call today find ourselves on the traditional unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq, Wolastoqey, and Passamaquoddy peoples. The territories are covered by the Treaties of Peace and Friendship, which the Wolastoqey, Mi'kmaq, and Passamaquoddy peoples first signed with the British Crown in 1726. The treaties did not deal with the surrender of lands and resources, but in fact recognized the Mi'kmaq and Wolastoqey title and established the rules for what was going to be an ongoing relationship between nations. So I ask if today we could take the opportunity to reflect on a relationship with the lands and the continuous process of colonization and decolonization that deeply impacts our work as activists and environmentalists. Concepts of two-eyed seeing, of seventh-generation planning, and other forms of traditional indigenous knowledge are key to sustainable future on our planet. I also call on settler governments to uphold their obligations under the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. We should be recognizing of these rights were stripped and denied using centuries of laws and policies based on legal doctrines, such as terra nullius, which declared the land empty despite the presence of Indigenous people. By acknowledging the land, we are offering a small act of resistance against the continued erasure of Indigenous people and their rights. That said, it seems to me that the next logical step is a recognition that true reconciliation will imply actually restoring some land to the Indigenous nations or nation that previously had sovereignty over those lands. So in that vein, I also want to recognize the ongoing court action by the members of the Wolastoqey Nation asserting title to their traditional lands along the St. John River, known to them, known as the Wolastoq, lands to which they never gave up title. I also like to recognize and offer solidarity with fishers and their ongoing struggle to assert their Supreme Court affirmed treaty right, the 1999 Marshall decision to hunt, to fish, to gather, and in pursuit of a moderate livelihood arising out of the peace and friendship treaties of the 1700s. And then finally, I want to acknowledge the thousands of Indigenous children who never made it home from the so-called residential schools designed, as we know, to eliminate the Indian from the child in what should be rightfully seen as genocide. The discovery of the unmarked graves over the past few months has been a heavy weight for all to bear, and I think all our hearts go out to our Indigenous brothers and sisters. I end by saying that as a product of a settler society and education system, it's our collective responsibility to unlearn the lies we were taught, but also to seek out a wealth of knowledge that was kept from us about Indigenous peoples who predate us on this land. And I think in the chat, if you want to learn more, the NBEN has started compiling a list of resources for reconciliation. It can be found on our website, and which we actually invite you all to add to. So it's like an ongoing list. Thank you, merci, Walalin, Waliwan. Let's get going. Okay, next slide. So, l'éco-confluence de cette année se déroule dans un...
So the Eco-Confluence this year is going to be in a special context at the 30th anniversary. It's already 30 years since we've been around. When we started speaking at the early part of the summer about what we wanted to do to celebrate that day, we hope to be able to get together in person because we're nonetheless a network. So getting people together, it's a major part of what we do. We would have liked to be in Shippagan. That was the idea, to celebrate the 30th anniversary. But once again, this year, the pandemic played a trick on us. So for that, it was we have to postpone that now. We foresee maybe Shippagan in the spring of 2022 with by the distribution of prizes, launch of a video that's really going to show the value of our organization to and its members to the community. And those are a couple other surprises. I don't know if you can go to the next slide. I'm now going to thank the sponsors that came on board for this 30th anniversary campaign for today's session, but others as well. We have the support of Brainworks, the town of Caracat, Architecture, Mr. and Savings Credit Union, the Réseau de Développement Économique du Nouveau-Brunswick, and Nordet Architecture, and the village of Shippagan. So when we discuss what we want to speak about today in getting together, we chose the climate crisis because, in our opinion, the climate crisis has an impact on the work of all organizations, and we cannot escape that. 2 years ago, we found ourselves in the streets for great numbers to answer a more urgent response for climate change, and ever since the COVID crisis have taken the attention, we'd like to ask today. We're 122 groups in the network, and we'd like to get organized collectively to put the climate crisis in the forefront. And we hope that this is the start. The pandemic has taught us something, is that it's possible to attack problems that could seem insurmountable if the political will is there. So for you this afternoon, we have a roundtable followed by 3 simultaneous workshops on that question. Afterwards, around 3 p.m., we will have the annual general meeting. We ask the member groups and also the associate members as well to stick around until that part to make sure we have quorum. That is the chance to approve financial statements, approve new groups, members and associates, and elect members of our board of directors. So,
Quinn, I think you're there. I saw you sign in. Je vais passer la parole à Quinn, membre du comité de direction.
Pass it over to Quinn.
To kick us off with a piece of slam poetry that is titled Fire, I believe.
Thank you very much, Tim. I'm joining today from Signik Mi'kma'ki, and I'm really excited to be here. I think it's pretty cool that the NBEN is turning 30. It's almost twice as old as I am. So here is my slam poem, Fire. Fire, the thing that sets us apart from other species, other creatures, the thing that gave us a head start. Fire, the thing that unleveled the field, made us think that what we conquered was ours to wield. Reality check, who's in control of nature now? Fast evolving humans know it's all just illusions. We can't control fire, it's got a mind of our own. We can't use fire as our claim to the throne, because who's really the master in between us? Well, fire's stronger, don't you see, cuz it's the symbol of the crisis that's tearing our world up. When our house is on fire, we have to wake up to the ashes that cover all the lies, to the smoke that chokes our planet and our skies, to the cries and the fear in the eyes of the youth. Wake up, because the tides aren't turning and we're living in a world that is burning. Trees, entire ecosystems burned to the ground, but there's still time to turn things around. The fire's within us now, deep inside, anger and passion that we cannot hide. Spark leads to flame, leads to blazing roar, and that is something politicians can't ignore. Energy sparks action, momentum is growing. Now it is clear which way the winds are blowing. The youth are alive with fire in our souls, a light on our faces, and the signs that we hold. We youth are awake to the world that we live in. We see the flames, but we're not ready to give in. So we stand hand in hand and speak our demands. Though surrounded by flames, we draw our strength from the land. We fight fire with fire, and we're not going to stop. Though every candle may just feel like a drop of water in a bucket, that's what made up the ocean. And together we're power, so don't get the wrong notion. Sparks jump between lands, fire knows no borders. Millions stand proudly upon the shoulders of our ancestors as we look ahead to future generations and think long and hard about what kind of nations we're passing down. And we want to hear your voice, so come and join us in the most important choice we've made since the beginning of time. Do we listen to the science and turn on a dime? Does the power of greed outweigh the power of need? The fires of destruction consuming our deeds. This is the moment where we choose, and with all we have to lose, I beg you to kindle your fire within, so that together as one we may begin the recreation of this earth, amid the ashes rebirth, and together we'll light the fires of tomorrow, and soon they'll blaze higher than the fires of sorrow. Thank you very much. Merci, Wallen.
Wow, I had to find the applause reaction button. Thanks, Quinn. That was awesome, and I think it's just what we needed to get us started. So at this point, I'd like to introduce our moderator for this afternoon's panel discussion, Susan O'Donnell from Rural Actions and Voices for the Environment, or RAVEN, at the University of New Brunswick. We've given our speakers 7 minutes each to speak, after which Susan will engage them in discussion. We invite you to leave comments or questions in the chat, and we'll go to them towards the end if time allows. And so, Susan, thanks so much for being here. The floor is yours.
Oh, thank you, Tim. And thank you, Quinn, for that. Such an inspiring poem. I'm really glad that we were able to start the meeting that way. That was just awesome. It was great. Okay, so I was asked to moderate this panel. We have 3 speakers who are each going to speak for about 7 minutes, and I will introduce them. They're going to go in the order of Sabine, Marion, and Louise. I'll introduce them just before each of them speaks. And the first panelist is Sabine Dietz, who many of you know. She's very active within the NBEN. Currently, Sabine is the Executive Director of Atlantic Canada's Climate Services Hub. And Sabine has worked for more than 30 years on grassroots species at risk and ecosystem conservation. So I will just mute myself and give it over to Sabine.
Thank you, Susan, and thanks very much, Quinn. Great poem. I'm also on unceded, unsurrendered territory in Sackville here. So yeah, thanks for inviting me for this, Tim. As Susan mentioned, I currently work for a nonprofit, Climate Atlantic, a new organization created by federal provincial government to help stakeholders and rights holders access, understand, and use climate data and information. So that's my current job. I volunteer nationally for conservation organization Nature Canada as a director, and that organization lobbies federal government and engages nationally with hundreds of NGOs on climate nature-related action. What I want to talk about, though, is my fairly new role as town councillor since June 2021, or the small p for politics at the forefront of climate impacts and action. This is really, communities are where the rubber hits the road. And when I ran for town councillor, I was pretty public about I want to run on a climate lens, so that at a municipal level, community level, we, in our decision making, apply a climate lens for both mitigation and adaptation to all the decisions that are made. It sounds really easy. It's not easy. So just a short piece on the Sackville story before I get into how is this related to collective climate organizing in New Brunswick post-pandemic. Sackville is maybe maybe it's got people like Quinn, so it's great. It's a university town, lots of projects related to town issues. It's got EOS Eco Energy, many of you know, which has been active in the community very much so since 2006, primarily focused on sustainability, but more and more on climate action since then. There are, on a yearly basis, way over 2,000 students that, I put this in quotation marks, invade our town. I'm so thankful they're around. There's lots of interested residents. We've got the Waterfall Park, a Naturalist Club, organizations such as Nature New Brunswick have an office here with Adam, who I saw is also on the call. There's been lots of presentations to council on various environmental issues in the past many years. There were also, of course, pre-pandemic climate strikes. And here in Sackville, there were over 400 people that participated. Staff in town are interested interested. They've actively participated even in the Brunswick Environmental Network projects, such as building regional adaptation capacity. The last mayor created the roundtable on climate change. Quinn was very active in putting that forward. We had a public forum in 2020, and some folks in the community applied a climate lens to just capital projects in 2019. So what happened during COVID was really that I think the community, like everybody across the country, realized that there is this, what Tim, I think, mentioned, there's this possibility of actually making change very quickly. And we had a community task force that's continuing post-pandemic that really brought things into focus and helped people as they needed it. So really increased the equity piece. We were also active in Black Lives Matter protests during COVID. And I think the community also realizes that climate disasters did not stop, obviously, during COVID. Staff are very supportive of climate action. We do have a climate change coordinator. We now have a climate change advisory group. We have a mayor's roundtable on climate change. And our council had a climate change orientation. It's a good place. It's a very good place to be, but there's tons of challenges. And so what I want to talk a little bit about is just why, and I know I've talked before about local governments and why they're so crucial. And some of you may know that I've also been active on other political fronts, but why are local governments so crucial? They are, as I mentioned, really at the forefront of impacts and action that's needed. We look at provincial governments and federal governments, there's a lot going on. There's a lot that needs to go on. The big decisions are really where, at those levels that it's made. But where it's closest to people, it's in local governments. Councillors have tons of issues to address. I can't even keep track of the meetings that I've had since June, since we were sworn in. There is a general awareness, I would say, of climate change impacts, but what kind of actions that are needed, that's really ambiguous. It doesn't sink in. It doesn't sink in. What does it actually mean to take climate change seriously and to consider climate change in every single decision that you make? And this will require a lot of help from the public, a lot of help from nonprofit organizations. What I want to point out is that, sure, councillors have a role to play. They make the final decisions, but staff are extremely important. They play a huge role. They can both support and advance as well as block advancements. So when you work with communities, keep that in mind. It's not just politicians, it's also the staff that work with the politicians, small p politicians. And I have to admit, climate change still falls off the wagon all the time. And I think it'll continue to do so for many years to come. So we're nowhere, even in our beautiful and very active, very engaged SACL, I don't think we're anywhere near where we should be and have to be in a very short time frame. Why I think so is that the puzzle pieces don't fit together for, I would say, people that are in elected office. The puzzle pieces that link climate change to social issues, to health issues, to everything that we do as people, they don't fit yet. They do not come together very easily. What makes councillors listen? And this is really, I think, something, I'll be able to talk to that about that more, but I think this is really important for NGOs, for activists, for people who are thinking about how can we move our communities forward. They need constant reminders. It's not enough to do a presentation once a year or for us to have a council orientation once a year. It really means constant reminders that pay attention, pay attention, pay attention, and say when there's mistakes being made. Very clear messages, very clear. It's not enough to say, well, we should use a climate lens. Actually, what is a climate lens? What does it mean to apply it to, I don't know, a REC plan? What does it mean to apply it to capital project decisions? What does it mean? So very, very clear messages. What do you want councillors and staff to do? Be also clear of what they can do, both in terms of if I want for council to understand something, I need to understand where they're coming from and also understand what they can actually do. There is limitations on councils, on municipalities and municipal governments, and they should be clear. There's only so far they can go as well. Offer help. They need help to understand both on the impacts, what do they mean? What do they mean for the community? But also on what they can do. What are things that they can do that are small enough for councillors to say, oh yes, we can do this now, to build it up. The working relationship with staff and council is hugely important. So I found in SACL staff supporting climate change moved things forward a lot faster than previously, when there was really not a great support with staff. And I've lived in SACL now for over 15 years. Also, the information and the push and the lobbying, the information, all of that needs to be out in public. Don't expect your elected officials to dig around. Literally, they are literally volunteers. Many of them have full-time jobs. The information that they need to digest during meetings and for meetings and for the purpose of making decisions is massive. So they constantly need help getting information. And in terms of SACL, which I'm bringing back to climate folks in SACL, is just, you have to go back. Don't rely on me being the counselor, helping to make decisions. I'm in council and I can support things, but one counselor alone cannot change council decisions or staff decisions. It needs to be really continued support and lobbying and push from outside. So anyway, I think, and I've said that before, local governments, they remain at the forefront of climate change. So pay attention. If there's any way you can work with and push them, that's really a place to start and a place to be really effective. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sabine. Some great messages in there, and really appreciate your focus on local government, especially since we have new councils across the province. I would just ask everyone to save your questions for the end. We're going to have some good Q&A at the end. And now I'll introduce our second speaker. Marion Tétégan-Simon est directrice de recherche à
Director of Research at the Valérez Research Institute. Marion is a representative of the province of New Brunswick on the Advisory Council on Sustainable Development. And Marion, go ahead. Thank you.
Merci, Suzanne. Merci
Thank you, Suzanne. Thank you, everyone. Hi, everyone. I'm very happy to be here today, so thank you for the opportunity. I want to present to you what Valérez is working on. Valérez is an organization, a nonprofit organization with several units of activities. So research unit, a service unit. When it comes to services, we offer services in analytical services in chemistry and with research. And I'm the one that is the director. We work with different partners. So our mission at Valérez is to serve in sustainable economic development for industry, but also for community. So the answer to that mission, our reason for being, our mission is that the problems of industry we can just help them in applied research. And so everywhere in the world, we're seeing societal change, environmental change, and economic change. And we have to propose innovative solutions based on research, applied research and concrete research. And with all these changes, we have to support industries and communities on the challenges that they face in environmental health in coastal regions, climate change adaptation, and the conservation of restoration of natural resources. So with Valérez, we have infrastructures, we have unique research structures that are unique in Northeastern New Brunswick. And we have a very good multidisciplinary team, which allows us to engage research questions that respond to the questions from industry. So all of that by utilizing a rigorous scientific approach that acts towards the needs of our partners. On the projects we work on, I mentioned a while ago, climate change and adaptation. There was on the regional level in the Cape Peninsula, we, like everywhere else, we see the rise in the waters and the increase of frequency of storms, the less ice that is going to cause here specific problems when it comes to erosion and flooding. For example, when it comes to erosion, there's certain coastlines of the Canadian Peninsula in 1944 to 2012 lost up to 86 meters. So it's more than 2 meters per year, certain years, which creates stressful problems. In 2011, there was an initiative from Adaptation Péninsula Acadienne, an initiative that is participatory. Why participatory and collective is because it reunites several nonprofit organizations and for-profit and the form of mayors in the Canadian Peninsula, the Department of Environment, and the Climate Change Secretariat, and also the Department of Natural Resources, different universities, municipalities, but also citizens. So this is a regional project that serves to identify and put measures in place to reduce erosion problems today and in the future, and the coastal erosion. We, Valorez, what we do is we try to accompany people when it comes to various measures and for each of the communities. So we offer services, tailored services for various communities. The way we work, we follow methodology, following 5 steps. First step is preparatory to allow us to analyze erosion and flooding situations. Second one is to target what are the priorities and potential strategies that we can put into place when it comes to various at-risk zones. Various areas have been identified. Third step is based on these, we want to do look at the selection of strategies, do feasibility analysis and things like that. And a third step, what is the writing of the plan. We write the plan, we discuss it with the Council of Citizens, we have public consultations, all of that to get a consensus with the adaptation plan that's going to be specific to the municipality that we're working with. And the last step is the realization of the plan, the implementation of the plan. Actions are put into play, and this plan can be updated depending on different challenges that could be met from day to day. For the Canadian Peninsula, why adaptation is important? What it signifies really is prevent is it costs less than reacting. And we're looking also to assure certain viability of our communities, and it's through different methods, different ways that we can limit the damage. And there's a lot of cases observed during the pandemic. We're not finished with the pandemic yet, for sure, but to ensure certain public safety and better quality of life. So what we have to win by joining together in this effort and to having we can be better, more efficient in the Gator region, and more credibility. When it comes to the communities as such, there's a sharing of expertise, resources, and a sharing of knowledge and experiences that are being done as well. So what we were able to observe during these 10 years, because it's already 10 years that the project exists, it's a 5-step process, but doesn't necessarily, it can be done in 5 years. So the length of this process is going to depend a lot on the availability of the concerned actors, but also depending on financing as well, that is going to accompany the feasibility of such projects. What we're able to notice, sadly, is that there exists still, we've observed during the public consultations and in consultations as well, either by phone or on social media, there still exist people who recalcitrant or fatalist. They believe that climate change does not exist, or that they even say, well, even if it exists, it's nothing too bad. I'm old, I'm older, I'm going to die tomorrow, I'm not going to have to worry about it. So we have a lot of education and awareness to be done. In the awareness work, we also observed that it's difficult to join every sphere of the community. There are still people in our regions who are either who are not connected to social media and have access to don't have access to information as much as us. And particularly these last 2-3 years, we've observed a higher stress level in the community. People who are worried and want to know how to find a solution when it comes to erosion. They want to save their heritage. But in parallel to that, we see for us, when it comes to our collaborators, We see an interest that continues to grow when it comes to regional decision makers, mayors and councils and things like that. Also, I want to mention that we had an important support when it comes to the Environmental Trust Fund, which allowed us to accompany different communities in which we're. When it comes to initiatives, when it comes to erosion, we have different restoration projects underway. We're using natural methods. Around the Niagara Peninsula since 2020, we started to accompany agricultural sector because they have various problems, whether it be early frost or late frost, frost episodes that arrive at times that are not foreseen. That's just one example, but there's also new insects. So we're trying to accompany them in that as well. And we started this year to help the aquaculture sector as well. I see there's only 1 minute left. So that's pretty much it. Later, we'll have a chance to have further exchanges when it comes to the pandemic. But pandemic or not, the emergency facing climate change, with climate change is there. I think it's very important that we can accompany not only communities, but also the industrial sector that could be affected by it. So thank you very much, everyone. I'll pass it over to Suzanne. Thank you,
Merci de
Marion.
nous mettre au courant.
Thank you to make us aware of the research at Valorez. Very interesting and good to know as well. Thank you.
The final speaker. Just before I do, Tim is moderating the chat. You can put your questions in the chat, and we will have time for a lengthy Q&A hopefully afterwards, and we'll continue the discussion into the workshop. Excuse me, the workshops. So our final speaker on this panel is Louise Como. Louise is an honorary research associate and instructor at the University of New Brunswick. In her role as an environmental consultant, Louise directs the Conservation Council of New Brunswick's Climate Change and Energy Solutions Program. So I'll turn it over to Louise. Thank you.
Great, thanks everybody. I did put a number of links to some of the material I'm going to speak to in my 7 minutes here into the chat. I encourage you to grab it all if you're keen on some of the details I'm going to speak about today. I'm structuring my comments as a good Catholic girl, according to what Tim asked me to do, which is respond to 3 questions. So I'm going to do that. The first being that the science is moving fast, and so what's changed in the past 2 years. So I'm going to talk about really what I perceive as an extraordinary moment. In fact, I'm feeling quite emotional about it. You might realize how geeky I am, but I'm emotional about watching an IEA, International Energy Agency press conference on the World Energy Outlook report, which is just unbelievable in change of perspective and tone, and talking about just how much of a turning point we're actually in. When you start to see agencies like the International Energy Agency embrace only a 1.5 degree scenario as the only basis to plan for our energy future, we have, I believe, entered into extraordinary times. Their latest work, of course, comes out of the IPCC work, which of course, again, reminds us that any additional warming is too much additional warming, that we risk, of course, climate chaos without incredibly rapid transformation. The International Energy Agency last year did a new scenario, finally, a world energy scenario, looking at what does it take to stay within 1.5 degrees. And the findings are startling. I mean, to the degree that things are said now as becoming common sense, that there can be no new oil and gas development approved. But on top of the scenario, the fact that the more, let's call it, common world energy outlook now is based on that scenario to a large degree, and compares the commitments of governments to that scenario, is something that has come out just in the last couple of days. And what it shows is, even when you compare what they call the net zero scenario for a 1.5 degree world to what governments have already announced, which we all know, of course, is inadequate, commits us to too much warming. But even under those commitments, oil consumption peaks in 2025 because of the rapid increase in electrification of transportation. So there are transformations happening in the system that are leading to reductions in trajectories for greenhouse gases that actually are starting to put us on track to at least 2 degrees, and we need significantly more to get us beyond that. But the changes in the last 2 years between the IPCC and what is happening at the energy institutional level, as well as the finance level, where we continue to see the influence of Mark Carney, former Bank of Canada head, bringing banks and so on to the table in terms of how they have to move away from fossil fuel investment. Again, we're going to all complain that it's not enough, it's not fast enough, but the changes in the last 2 years, I do believe, are significant. The other change, I think, in the last, I would say not just 2 years, but the last 2 weeks, is that Canada is actually being called out as the laggard that it is. Both a report called Hot or Cool, which is a consumption-based analysis of countries' emissions and where they come from, actually included Canada as a standalone as opposed to throwing us in with North America or just saying, well, you're like the Americans. We actually have our own very detailed study, which shows that Canada outconsumes everyone in the world, no matter what it is. We got the bigger houses, we drive more, our cars are bigger. Our emissions per capita are the highest of the 10 countries, including high-income countries like Finland, and which of course has winter. And so the question of Canada being exposed, not only for weak targets today, but of course, as everybody knows, its failure to this point to reach targets. I think that, and lots of people will argue with me about this, but I have to say it as I believe it, that a lot of infrastructure and foundational regulatory change is occurring, and that we should start to see some changes in a decline rate, just like the World Energy Outlook shows in Canada as well. But our targets don't reflect our fair share. Our targets don't reflect our overconsumption of the atmosphere. So what the current government's bringing to Paris and had brought to Paris and is now bringing to Glasgow are completely unacceptable, 40 to 45%. And we need to be 60% or more on our way to zero. And so the fact that Canada is being exposed in all the ways that it has, both in the World Energy Outlook report, we stand out again, and they don't hide it. We're sitting right there, Canada, at the top of every chart in the worst possible way, as well as in our consumption. And I think those are critically important, because governments no longer will accept products from countries that are not doing their fair share. Carbon border adjustments are coming. Our products will be taxed at import. And so I just want to point out that I do believe the ground is shifting. I also think it's important that we grab our opportunities. If we keep telling everybody we're a failure, it's hard to turn around and actually convince people we got to get on the train and turn on that dime, which I think we can and we need to do. Tim then asks, what about this question of what's happening on the policy front? Can we build an approach here similar to the pandemic? And I want to just talk now about New Brunswick. New Brunswick is the most passive aggressive province I would say we have in the country on climate change. They really are a defensive, not an offensive play. They don't understand that the world is changing around them, and the fact that through other reasons like industrial restructuring, our emissions are in line with current federal targets. They seem to think no further action required. This is ridiculous. It puts us at risk as a province. It puts us at risk from a quality of life point of view. And it puts us at risk from an economic point of view, not just on opportunities, but because people won't want our polluting products. And so just a few examples of the situation that I think we face. We currently have passivity in terms of not thinking about deep emissions reductions. We don't have, of course, a deep target for zero by 2050. We are trying to get an equivalency agreement to keep burning coal for another 20 years. NB Power is proposing to keep its oil and natural gas plants running until 2050. Irving wants to keep running the refinery with just some hydrogen and carbon capture. The feds are putting on the table several new standards. Several new standards that are going to make it very difficult for New Brunswick to run the way it's thinking it's going to run. So let me just close up and say that I really think the opportunity, as has highlighted by these agencies and our own work, is that the time is for a focus not just on what we don't want, but what we do want. And that is through a pathway of electrification, electrifying our province, cleaning up our electricity, closing all the fossil plants, electrifying our transportation. And that I see a campaign opportunity around that we'll talk about in the workshops. Thanks.
Thank you, Louise. Wow, I think we're all inspired all the time by your energy and dedication and your knowledge on this topic. So thanks very much for that. We're going to move now to a Q&A until 2 o'clock. You can either put your questions in the chat or raise your hand, and you can do that depending what version of Zoom you have. If you go on reactions, there's a hand clap or a raise hand. Or you can go under participants and you'll see an option to raise your hand, and then I'll ask people to voice their questions in the order in which they raise their hands. This is a panel, an expert panel. I would ask you to keep your questions short, direct it at one or all the panelists. And this isn't the time for a lot of discussion. We're going to have that in the workshops, okay? So this is a chance to get your questions answered by our expert panelists. So I'm going to just ask Vincent to, if you want to ask the questions in the chat first, and then everyone please raise your hand and I'll go to you that way. Thank you.
We have a first question from Somi for Sabin, I believe.
Oh, great. I'm so lucky. Thank you. I'm realizing that I'm the spotlight person, but I can't spotlight myself for some reason. So you'll have to just listen to my voice. So I'm wondering if, oh, thank you, whoever did that. Sabine, I was really interested to hear what you were saying about counselors and how they find information. And I guess I just wanted to know more about that. Is there any official place in New Brunswick that counselors are encouraged to get their information that they make policies on? Or is it just anywhere and everywhere?
Wow, that's a good question. I think it is anywhere and everywhere. And I have found that it can be very limited to what you get through other counselors or what you get from staff. So counselors that are, I would say, make decisions based on evidence have to do a lot of digging. Now, there is a curious piece that came to me that actually Margot Shepherd, another counselor in Fredericton, who is a green counselor, green in terms of being really interested in supporting environmental and climate change action, pointed me to, which is a climate caucus, a national caucus for elected municipal officials. And so I have now, I'm pushing some councillors towards that, being participants, and there is an Atlantic caucus starting up. So I'm hoping that that will focus a little bit of our information on climate change and action just specifically. But in general, it is a simple fact that most councillors, or many, are full-time and have a hard time doing the extra digging. So that's why I'm saying too that they need the information coming from outside. And so whenever EOS, Eco-Energy, does presentations to town council, or when the Mayor's Roundtable did presentations and did orientation for town councils, it's extremely well received, because if you have an organization or individual who's respected by, in general, in a community, that person can bring relevant information to town councils that they will take seriously. Otherwise, you can't really expect councillors to do all the digging by themselves, because there's so much they need to learn, so much they need to do research on theoretically.
Thank you, Sabine, and thanks for that question, Zomi. We have another question here from Linnea. She's directed at Louise Como, but any others who know the answer, it's in the chat about the Atlantic Hydrogen Alliance. Do you want to respond to that, Louise? And if you know any information about it?
Sure. And Linnea, if you could put the link in the chat, that'd be great. So that we can take a peek at it. I didn't see that specific thing, but I can tell you what, there's a lot of plays going on right now with hydrogen. Irving's also announced a hydrogen project at the refinery. There's a lot of interest in hydrogen, whether it's the versions of green, blue, or gray. If they're calling this green, and it's got heritage gas, I suspect it's more blue than green. Green would be where you're using renewable energy to generate hydrogen through electrolysis or some biofuel. If it's just capturing carbon capture in natural gas processes, then I suspect that that's what they're doing if it's heritage gas. But lots and lots of interest in hydrogen. And the reason for that is, you know, the claim is that we can't electrify all transportation. The very heavy load transport needs require a denser fuel, and hydrogen fuel cells are seen as part of that. So I'll take a look at that just to make sure, but just to say it is an issue we need to pay attention to for sure.
Right, thank you. I put the link in the chat.
Okay, thanks Linnea, and thanks Louise for your answer. J'ai une question maintenant pour Marion and Louise, et peut-être pour.
I have a question for Marion and Louise, and maybe for Sabine as well.
You've all referenced that the research is out there, but how do you actually get it to knowledge, and then how do you get it to action is another question. So maybe Marion first, since your job is specifically as a research director, how do you, je peux dire aussi que vous pouvez.
I can also say that you can obviously answer in French or in English.
How do you move the research out into the world so that it translates into action? Thank you.
Merci, Suzanne. La façon dont
Thank you, Suzanne. I'm going to answer in French. The way that we work, it's a lot of awareness from us towards citizens. When it comes to research that we do, we try to do workshops, we try to have little meetings to communicate our observations. We as well, the research team, we participate in workshops. We participate in other workshops to be up to date on what's going on outside. There's a lot of initiatives outside the Acadian Peninsula that are being done. When I look at what's being done in Quebec and even outside of Quebec, throughout the world, there's a lot of things that are being done. And our role, and especially with erosion, what we try to see how we can apply the research initiatives here. There's we've done quite a lot of workshops and training sessions, and it was through the Regional Service Commission here, and because they work as well with the research tools. So it's a way to outline how we work and to make people aware about climate change, which there is still a lot of people that are undecided about the whole issue, and sadly that don't believe us. So there's a lot of work. It's a lot of demonstrations, things to show them. Thank you, Mary.
I just want to give Louise and Sabine a chance if you want to also address that question. Thank you.
Sure. May I go, Sabine, first? Is that okay?
Yep.
So I guess I'm going to say a couple of things. One is we do a lot of research, and we do a lot of translation of other people's research as well. And if you, when I'm not speaking, I'll go into our website and put the link in for you. But on our website, you know, at CCMB, we've done a lot of work trying to translate technical material into plain language material. We do a lot of that kind of work with our electricity vision. Our climate change portal is really simplified. So we try to make it simple, but we also try to speak to people from their own perspective. We do a lot more work now through what I call the love door. We try to work with more positive emotions. And finally, we're trying to learn new tricks. Right now we're fundraising for, and we're doing art, lots of incredibly really moving work with artists now on how to communicate climate change. It's fantastic work. That I think is smart work. But we're also trying to get smarter and learn something that would lead us to do more door-to-door canvassing, actually talking to people through techniques called deep listening, where we can engage people through stories and help teach each other, kind of what we're feeling about things, open doors to communication. And so we want to do a lot more of that kind of work if we can raise the resources that we think we can to do that. Because we actually think the passive ways, the social media ways are not really that effective.
So I want to come at it from the other end, from the climate change adaptation side, because Climate Atlantic's role is indeed to translate, to provide, to help access, translate, interpret, and then use climate data. And the reason why I was so interested in leading this work is primarily because of all the mess that's out there. So especially in terms of when I look at municipalities, which I've worked with pre-Climate Atlantic, it's really hard to understand what's out there and then to interpret. So I think the biggest thing is the way I see this, there's two pieces to it. One is to make sure that you know which data you're using, where it's coming from, and whether it is actually good data. And the other piece is, how do I use it and how do I then make decisions based on it? So this is more for the organizations or for the municipalities or for the sectors. It's less so for what Louise is talking about. And it is my work that I'm currently doing is, of course, focused on adaptation, which is questionable in that it's separated from mitigation, which it should never be, and it can't be. But that's another side story. So I think we're in a situation, in some ways, what Louise was talking about, the sort of hopefulness of things are changing in the big picture, right? And so where my focus is really to make sure that when people make decisions in terms of adapting to climate change, especially, that they have the right information, they know where to go. And since Climate Atlantic is an Atlantic-wide organization, we will support anybody who wants to do this kind of work, right, in what they're doing. So the translation and interpretation of climate data is becoming, or climate information is becoming, more and more important because there is so much access to that kind of stuff and to many different kinds of interpretation to that. So anyway, that's all I want to say to that. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you to the panelists for responding. That's just great. We have a number of other questions here. Okay, I see Lucille coming up. We have questions before Lucille's, but why don't, since you're up there, Lucille, that's fine. Why don't you ask your question? I'd just like everyone to know that you will have time to discuss more with the panelists in the workshops. Go ahead, Lucille.
Okay, it was not my fault that I came up here, but...
C'est ma faute, je m'excuse.
C'est bon. Ma question, c'était pour Sabine.
My question is for Sabine. You speak French, Sabine? I'm wondering if a municipal political party could be a solution to bring municipalities to work more and more on environmental issues. I know in Quebec, it's something that's being done. There's a lot of political parties at the municipal level, so it helps you to choose candidates based on their values. And we tried to put in place something similar to that on the Acadian Peninsula, which did not work, sadly. But I'm wondering if that is something that was proposed. A bit like in British Columbia as well, Vancouver, there's political parties, like you said. But I'm not sure if it's permitted here. There's a lot of too much problem with the legislation for municipalities, but most municipalities here are very small. So we start creating political parties, and you're putting a frame around a person, like a green frame around someone. And in the municipal governance, I don't know if that's a good idea, because in municipalities, we know each other in the small municipalities. I'm not sure if it's a good idea for the larger municipality. Maybe for large municipalities is good, but I'm convinced it's not a good thing for. I would not be in a corner, just be the green person. I admit that I probably am, but I don't think it's a good idea. There's people who are more progressive in their politics. It's quite easy to paint them into the corner as environmentalists. But climate change goes through all of that. You don't have to be green or You need someone that just thinks a little bit more long term. That's all you need. Just maybe to encourage people to get into municipal politics. But thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you,
Excellent,
Sabine.
merci. Merci Sabine. Et merci pour la question. Je vais demander maintenant. Oh,
Great. Okay, so Tim's going to ask his question next. That's just great. Please go ahead, Tim.
Sure. I mean, my main question for this panel, I was wondering if there was, because the NBN, we represent groups or we're composed of groups, I should say. If there was one thing our groups, one climate ask or one climate piece of action, like all our groups could kind of rally around, just each of you, what would that be?
Okay, we'll go first to Louise, then Marion, and then Sabine.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things here. The province does have a climate plan. It expires in December. The measures that are funded expire in March. There's a whole process about to be launched on renewing our climate plan. And I think this is an opportunity to rally and for us to really do some campaigning work to phase out all the fossil fuel power plants in the electricity sector, electrify transportation, and double our renewable energy target. I mean, there are some pretty simple things we can do, and we got some nice things that we can try to get into the renewed climate plan. We've got 6 months to kind of pull it off.
Merci, Louise. Marion?
Merci, Tim. Est-ce que tu peux
thank you, Tim. Can you ask your question again in French, please? Seeing as the Environment Network is comprised of organizations and groups, I'm wondering if we could ask one action and we could all contribute to that one action, what would it be in your opinion? I think maybe it'd be interesting to rally around how we can work on the climate emergency in all spheres, whether economic or community, the same way that we're be able to answer to the around the pandemic question. Everybody wants to do their share, and I think that is what we might have to do. Find positive leaders that could have the ear of our decision makers to act.
Okay, so my response to that is maybe a big P for politics is hit your MLAs over the head, educate them about climate change, because I swear half of them don't believe in it. Otherwise, we wouldn't be in what Louise described, our backwards thinking on climate change. It's critical to make what Louise suggested possible. Currently, I just think they're somewhere on the moon and somewhere in the clouds. So hit your MLAs over the head. Don't do that physically, but by all means, meet with them and show them what's going on in our province already today and what people are already facing, and make them understand that this is going to get worse. So I think they need some wake-up calls that are severe. Thanks, Tim.
Okay, great. Thank you, panelists. Thanks, Tim, for the question. I'm going to ask Vincent to read the question from Quinn now, who you can't see, but I think Vincent can see it.
We have a question from Quinn for Louise. She was wondering if Louise could talk a bit more about what she mentioned about other countries potentially refusing to accept products from countries who aren't in line with their emissions target.
Yes, it's the hot new policy. It's always a hot new policy. So the European Union started this. It's called carbon border adjustments, and they're threatening to place high tax tariffs on imports from countries with weak climate change policies. Biden is also considering carbon border adjustments, which would affect Canadian exports, which I actually hope they apply to our electricity so that we cannot sell electricity from fossil fuel sources. So that's the idea. You'll also hear Canadian politicians talk about it, and they're talking about it as if we're going to put a tax on imports from China and weak countries, and they don't perceive it's going to affect Canada. I actually think the risk is to Canada more than it's going to be, but it's coming, and it's going to be two-way taxation.
Okay, thanks, Louise, and thanks for the question, Quinn. I think we just have one more question in the messages in the chat. So we'll go to that and we're just going to go over just slightly.
Si on ferait un canal communautaire en ligne.
Okay. Could everyone who's not speaking please go on silent? But the question's from Sadia. So please go ahead. Thank you.
Ma question s'adresse surtout aux trois
My question is addressed to the three panelists. I'd like to know how can communities could take a more concrete position in order that actions continue to be viable, because we see that there's a lot of research projects that are being done, whether with Valores or others with Luis Como. But how can we really communicate with communities to make sure the initiatives come from communities, which is basically a transfer of knowledge, where the communities are feel much more involved without having, they have basic knowledge, so the knowledge can be easily transferable, and actions come from them, or suggested actions come from them.
Ce sera la dernière question.
That will be the last question, and I'm going to ask Marion first of all to answer. Thank you. Thank you, Suzanne. Thank you, Sadia. When it comes to our adaptation project, we are at the last part of the process. We furnish the communities all the tools. There's the awareness tools, and they can put that in their municipal newspapers. There's the possibilities of to continue offering information every season to inform and to make the population more aware. We also furnish tools, like if they need things for restoration, to organize workshops, whatever.
De participants. Donc, les gens viennent, puis ils apprennent, ils comprennent pourquoi il ne faut pas faire de tonte jusqu'au bord de la côte, comment je peux préserver. Ils posent des questions.
How can we, they ask questions, through that type of regular workshops, make them aware. Some people, they do certain actions themselves afterwards, because to protect their coastline, because they understand that one method is better than another to conserve the coastline. So for us, we furnish them with the tools, and we're always present. We have the support of, I think that's the case for other groups. So we have the support of the Department of Environment when it comes to education and awareness about climate change, understanding what erosion is, these types of things. And I'm going to answer the other question as well. I think it's super important for us. In the Acadian Peninsula, there are municipalities, there's towns, villages, but there are also LSDs that they're apart. They don't necessarily, they cannot ask for subsidies and have their own plan. Yes, maybe full municipalization is going to help, so that everybody can learn to adapt facing climate change.
Thank you. I'm going to have to end it here because we've already eaten into the workshop time, but I'd just like to give a real and virtual clap to the panelists and to everyone for asking your questions. Thanks very much. I'm going to turn it over to, I believe, Tim now to explain the next step. Thank you.
Thank you to the panelists, to Louise, Marion, and Sabine, and thank you to you, Susan, for doing a good job with the moderation. Thanks to everyone for your questions and your comments. Very pertinent.